Hey, one more thing before you go. What does it take to turn untold stories into captivating journeys that mesmerize audiences around the world? How does adventurous filmmaking blend history, innovation, and a touch of mystery to leave a lasting impact on viewers? That's what we all want to do. Today, we're exploring these questions and many more with an extraordinary guest who has mastered the art of storytelling in nonfiction television and is moving into historical fiction. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. I have the privilege of introducing Neil Laird. He's an Emmy-nominated producer, director, documentary filmmaker, novelist, and a creative visionary. Neil's career spans over 1,000 hours of programming. Many of these I'm sure that you have seen. He's an Emmy-nominated director of historical films for Discovery, BBC, PBS, History, National Geographic, and many other networks, too many to list. Many of his shows feature pickled pharaoh. This is a quote off of your site. Pickled pharaohs, creepy secret passageways, and lost rooms in molding rainforest. His need for adventure and historical unfolding is taking him over 70 countries in the heart of some of the world's most intriguing stories. Beyond his groundbreaking work in nonfiction television, Neil is also a novelist, blending humor, history, and fantasy to create an unforgettable narrative. We'll talk about that. As an LGBTQIA plus creator, Neil offers unique perspectives on representation in media and the power of diverse storytelling. Throughout this episode, we'll unravel the secrets behind adventurous filmmaking, explore the challenges and triumphs of crafting nonfiction stories, and uncover the impact of balancing education and entertainment. So whether you're a creative professional, history enthusiast, or you're simply someone looking to be inspired, stick around. This conversation promises to be a journey all of its own. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm very impressed by the introduction. The fact that you used all those words so succinctly and wisely.
That was
We
a
could use.
mouthful.
You did it well.
Thank you very much. What an amazing journey that your life has taken. I mean, it's hard to really put into words the contribution that you made to society, especially in the world of nonfiction. Television programming and filmmaking and history and educating people and motivating people and inspiring people. It's just amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I certainly enjoy it, and it's always been a passion of mine. So it's so fantastic to hear when people are getting something out of it.
You know, I think we in this life, we have two choices. We can participate or we can sit back and watch. And I think hopefully that, we have a nice balance of both, but you have absolutely contributed to society and culture in such a way that it's just a privilege to have you here, buddy. So I do like to start at the origin story. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh. So a town called Greensburg, which I'm sure is not on any cultural map. But I always knew that I wasn't going to hang around there because I was enamored of cinema my entire life, movies. I always thought I would do theatrical movies. I grew up watching all the great classics. I loved myself a good epic. Lawrence of Arabia, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Seven Samurai. Anything was escapism out of Western Pennsylvania. So I think that's what kind of put me on my journey. Is just basically get to where all that stuff is happening.
We have a lot in common in regard. I wasn't born in Pittsburgh, but we were born in the same month, though. So we have that brotherhood. But my father and eons of my family are from Pittsburgh and Allegheny County and all, that whole area, actually. So, we have something in common there, along
So,
with the
along with
movies.
all this, we have more than in common with Western Pennsylvania. We have all this going on too.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think you would have been enthusiastic if we didn't already share the same love of storytelling and being transported. I hope it's
So,
early in the conversation. Find out.
yes, it takes you, it lets you escape. It lets you escape into a different world, and you can enjoy it in such a way that you're sitting in the theater, and you're encompassed by what's going on around you. You can visit faraway places. You can participate in action. You can get the bad guy. You can be the bad guy. I was never the bad guy part. I was always the other side. But yeah, it's amazing. I love filmmaking and documentary producing and so forth, which you've done a lot of. You produced and directed over or directed over 1,000 hours of programming and traveled more than 70 countries. Was there any specific moment that made you realize storytelling was like your calling? I mean, did you go to college? Did you go to university?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with stories. I think. I mean, I love history and I love science, but I don't have the science or history mind. You know, I can barely speak English, let alone other languages, and I have no mathematical understanding and stuff. So I was always gravitated towards stories as a way to kind of get information out. And I always tell the story about when I was a young kid and when the penny dropped and when I realized the magic of movie making. And I wish I could say it was some of those films I mentioned earlier, like David Lean or Kurosawa. But I was a young kid, and my parents took me to see the Poseidon Adventure when I was 5 or 6 years old in the early '70s. And I remember it was a big crowded theater in Pittsburgh. We came out, and I lost my parents after the show. But I was so dazzled by what I saw, these people dying, a ship capsizing, these people trying to get out and dying along the way, that my body was still shaking from this experience I just had. But what I remember most about the evening was walking out into the lobby, looking for my parents, and instead finding this one sheet poster, the big poster of the movie, which was a silhouette of the upside capsized ship, and then like I think it was some ridiculous title like Hell Upside Down or whatever it was. And then down below, and this is where it gets interesting, I saw the little squares of all the actors who were in it. Gene Hackman and Leslie Nielsen and Shelley Winters as XXX. And then below that, I saw directed by, written by, produced by. And I realized that I had been duped. Even as a 6 or 7 year old kid, I realized that someone did this to me. Someone made me feel this way. Some magic wizard somewhere, a cobble of wizards got together and created this world and made me feel this way. It made me cry when Shelley Winters drowns and all the stuff that was a movie is supposed to do. That I was enamored of cinema ever since. I was fascinated by the magic and the alchemy that cinema can give you. And why I wish I could say it was like, some obscure Antonioni movie or a Bergman movie or something. It makes sense. It was a Poseidon Adventure. It was a big epic that would appeal to a 6 year old kid. And I've been chasing that excitement ever since. All my life, I want to who are the people at the bottom of the poster?
That's very cool. What I mean that, especially at that age. I mean, I understand that very much. So I remember those old movies so well. The Creature from the Black Lagoon was one of my first horror movies that I think I had ever seen as a child. I grew up watching Tony Curtis in everything from everything actually. The Great Race. I mean, you anything he was in, you name it, I was there. I got to meet Tony Curtis. I had him at a conference that I put on in Las Vegas. We honored him at this Las Vegas Screenwriters Conference one year, and we brought out Tony Curtis and talking about fanboy. It was one
That's
of those. Yeah, it was like I grew up watching him. I grew up enamored by him, and he walked up and gave me a big hug, and then said, "Buy me a drink," and I could barely talk.
that's what I've never met, but I can well imagine that's what he would say. And I remember from Spartacus and what else did he do? The Vikings and stuff. I love all that stuff. He was so much fun in those things.
Oh, just it's very, very cool. So I love this world. I'm glad that you got to participate in as much as you have. Your career is taking this career in particular. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. Did you go to university?
Well,
Did
that's the
you?
thing. Yeah, I mean, so all growing up in small town PA, I thought I would, become a filmmaker. I've always wanted to, and I took a small filmmaking class for high school students in Pittsburgh. I went to film school at Temple University in Philadelphia, the RTF program, radio, TV, film. And then I remember I graduated in the late '80s, and because I had a bachelor's of the art, that I thought that I would become Martin Scorsese overnight. So I took that Amtrak up to New York, just waiting for the call to happen. And it didn't happen. I was a poor schlub holding a walkie-talkie on like Toxic Avenger Part 12 or whatever
Hmm.
rubbish it was in the bowels of Queens at 2 in the morning, making sure they didn't steal the grip truck. That was my job. I mean, the lowest possible rung underneath the barrel. And I was happy to get that for $50 a day or whatever it was in 1988. But clearly I became disillusioned after a while because it's a long way from that to Martin Scorsese. So I
Hmm.
remember waiting weeks, before the phone to call, whatever, for the next potential crap job. And it was New York City, expensive, and it was the summertime. I had nowhere else to be and no money to be there. So I started hanging out at the New York Public Library because it was free and air conditioned. And one day I plucked a book off the shelf. And I don't know why I plucked it off, but it was a book about Neolithic man. It's about the rise of cavemen, about the rise of civilization. Something I never got in my Catholic school in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And again, I was hooked. I had no idea this world of history existed, simply because wasn't reading it. And I became so fascinated by the rise of civilization and having so much bloody time in my hands that I resolved to teach myself history through the New York Public Library for free while I waited the phone not to ring. And I read book after book, and I became voracious in reading these books. I remember taking them home to a friend. Saying, "You're not going to read all those books. 12 books on ancient Egypt. You're joking." I read them all. Went back for more. And when I got to the ancient world, particularly Egypt, Mesopotamia, up until maybe Greco-Roman time, I got stuck. I became so fascinated by these early cultures and what they did and how they did it that all I wanted to do was see that world. I wanted to walk in the shadow of the pyramids. I wanted to walk in front of the Acropolis. I wanted to see all these things. So I did that. I kind of raised enough money from whatever nonsense job I was doing, and I backpacked to the Middle East for 8 or 9 months. Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, which is my happy place, Israel. I say Turkey, I can't remember. And I came back with the head in the clouds. My head was in the clouds. This was my world. I wanted to get back there, but I can't afford to keep going on my own dime. So how the hell can I get someone to pay me to go back? So I went back to film school in Columbia College, Chicago, for my MFA in documentary production with the idea to do historical filmmaking. And that's what I did. Through a friend of mine who lived in Egypt, I was able to tag along on the people who were restoring the Great Sphinx of Egypt, all the stonemasons who lived in East Cairo. They didn't speak English, I didn't speak Arabic, but we got on fine. And I used school equipment, and my thesis film was called Saving the Sphinx, and I sold it to the Learning Channel in 1997, and I've been doing that ever since.
What an amazing opportunity to walk through history and touch history and to kind of be there. It's different when you watch it on TV or you see it in the movies or you see what they've built sometimes, and you think you're seeing what it is, but in reality it's not. But what an amazing feeling to touch history. That
Oh, it's fantastic, and it's they always say you can't step at the same river twice, and it's true in terms of going back and seeing the pyramids or Petra or whatever else they were. But you can still get that buzz. You can still get the buzz. And I
yeah,
go back to Egypt, free back to Egypt 4 or 5 dozen times or something, and I still get a buzz when I'm in Karnak or when I'm seeing the pyramids. There's something about those ancient distant cultures that has shaped my life in such a profound way
yeah,
that it was a before and an after. I mean, it got me out of narrative, and I went into documentary. Narrative is far more lucrative. Martin Scorsese makes far more than executive producer Discovery Channel, I can tell you. That is where my passion and my drive went. And to get back there and to see these cultures, to stand there, you know, it doesn't have to be ancient. It doesn't have to be the ancient world. It can just be. I was just in Paris last weekend, and just looking at the Eiffel Tower again and saying, "My God, when
yeah.
we get it together, humans can be."
Yeah, it's if you look at the history that you walk through, the history that you touch, whether it be Egypt or whether it be the architecture in France, the architecture in Paris, or the architecture in southern France or northern France, or the castles in England or Ireland or Scotland, and you see what the the lives that were lost, the lives that were built, the empires that were lost, the everything that involved those places is different here because here in the United States, as you know, they'll walk in, they'll wipe something off the map, rebuild something, and you never knew it was there.
If you see a store, I live in Brooklyn, people put with pride up in their window here since 1968, and that's ancient history.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's if it was BC, it would be something, but it's 1968 AD.
Yeah,
But the other
that's
thing is, it's not to me. It's not just seeing the stones and the pillars. It's how I find myself in the cultures, the modern day cultures as well. So I'm not living among the dead. When you're in Turkey, when you're in Greece, when you're in Egypt, when you're in Israel, whatever, you are have to talk to the people that are there. And
Yeah.
the little kid from Pittsburgh comes out, and then the gruff guy from New York comes out. But the respect for the culture that's there and trying to understand who they are and connecting is something that keeps it always fresh. Because all these places they're not museums; they are living places where
Yeah.
people have been living, moving around for the thousands of years since Karnak fell. So yes, it's the people who take me there, but it's the people and the experiences and how they treat the culture that keeps me going back. And that, of course, is the stuff that I focus on in my films.
Yeah. Do you find and feel that those cultures and those societies really have more of a respect for the ancient, more respect for their ancestors from that area and what they've built and what they've got?
Well, I think is a very. I mean, being American is has a, yeah, we have such a stunted growth in terms of our our history, as we said, because we're a young country. That makes us upstart, arrogant, and feel like we still got the bravado that some of these world weary countries of the ancient Near East or China or do not. But what they have is they have that understanding that culture is cyclical and that it doesn't always go up. Culture goes in a circle, and they're bound to their ancestors in a way that is not just we're better than the people who built the pyramids. We're part of it. So you talk to different people are the same everywhere. You can talk to one guy in Egypt who only sees the pyramids, an Egyptian who sees them as a way to make money and to sell you cheap papyrus as you get off your tour bus. And somebody else looks at them with such great pride because these are the people that we are still standing on the shoulders of all these years. So
Yeah.
there's different ways to connect with your past, as we do here too. The way we treat our founding fathers or the Civil War. It's the same sort of concept, I think, that the Egyptians or other ancient cultures do as well. And then,
Yeah.
of course, when you go to places like Iraq or Iran, which have, seen a lot of war and there's people that have lost so much of their culture, you can
Yeah.
tell it's tragic to them, not because they've lost some sort of cash cow of ancient Babylon. It's because some piece of them is gone that will never come back.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I remember a few years ago when so many things were being destroyed by some of the groups out there that they were literally blasting them off of the face of the rocks. And, it was very,
Yeah,
very sad, very
and
heartbreaking when that was taking place, just based on where it had come from. In your career that has taken you over 70 countries, can you tell us about like a location or experience? I mean, I think you just did, but it's something that with an experience that kind of left you or had a profound impact on you. Other like I know that say Egypt sound like it might have been it, but is there something or some place that left such an impact in you? Pompeii, for example, or something that really left something indelible in you that kind of
yeah,
went,
certainly
wow.
Egypt is a happy place, but Pompeii is also a favorite of mine. My last book was written in Pompeii, and Pompeii is an inkwell you can keep dipping into because anyone who's listening to this who's been to Pompeii knows that unlike most other ancient sites, you don't have to imagine too much what it was like. You are walking down the streets of Pompeii, and you are seeing fast food joints and brothels and graffiti and political art. And you go in rooms and you see where they ate and dined and made love and slept, and it brings them so much closer together. So when people always ask me, where should I travel first? It's impossible to say. But I do think Pompeii is a great starter city, merely because it doesn't require some of the imagination that some of these denuded cultures are, where it's just a pillar in the sand dune. Pompeii still feels like it's this close to being alive. So I think, in terms of sweeping someone off their feet, Pompeii is the perfect starting point. Yeah.
It's interesting. And I know that you wrote the book about that, and we'll talk about that in here a few minutes. But the have you seen the some of the artificial intelligence recreations of what life was like in those, like in Pompeii or in Greece or in some of these other places that were destroyed?
I have, because when I was promoting my Pompeii book last fall, I did a lot of AI stuff. I did stuff on TikTok and elsewhere, and was looking at a lot of how people kind of recreated that. Some of these were coming from university sites, and some came from elsewhere. But there's so much to see and reimagine, and of course Pompeii, that is so dramatic. What's
Yeah.
fascinating is when I was doing a mock up for my book cover for Primetime Pompeii. I was trying to do some videos of my time crew as a time traveling time crew and put them into ancient Pompeii as Vesuvius was erupting. And what's interesting is the AI wouldn't let me.
Really?
It kept confusing it because in the algorithm of AI, they see Pompeii, rightly so, as a disaster, as a thing that should not be in any way celebrated or
Mm,
any way turned into entertainment because it's no different than an explosion somewhere. So it's fascinating how all those things are kind of set in terms of what it is. But Pompeii is one of those great things too. When you look at those plaster casts, is and everybody knows hopefully what the plaster cast where people were frozen in the moment when the
mhm,
pyroclastic flow hit them, and that's how they're found today all over Pompeii and museums and nearby Naples and stuff. But I love how people look at them and they try to suss out who these people's lives are. They say that this is a fleeing couple, or this is a man who is a merchant, and yet that means everybody is judged by that 1 second when they're frozen at the very
mm.
end, and that is their moniker for all time.
That
It's impossible for us to look at any bones, any mummy, any plaster cast, and assume what the life they lived, what the experiences were, what the world they it unfolded in.
I think it's just I think us society in general I think wants to understand a little bit more. And I think creating those narratives around that and what it might have been or what they should have been or what they look like they could have been doing gives it more of a personal perspective in the regard to the fact that they die so quickly in
Yeah,
such a horrific manner that it allows I think our minds to kind of give a better understanding of well yes, this was a person, this was an individual that was functioning within the city and contributing to something.
yeah.
I find it the reason I asked you that question about Pompeii in particular because the book I'm assuming that a lot of that gave you the inspiration for writing the. I know that you've got two. Again, we'll differentiate those here in a little bit, but the one in Pompeii in particular because I've always had a fascination with Pompeii. So was my wife in regard to that whole aspect of what happened and what took place and how they found it. And they're still digging stuff up.
Only what I think 1/3 is still unexcavated in Pompeii.
Yeah, it's crazy how much they're still doing. And then when you recreate, when they start chipping away at everything, you see streets and you see houses and you see businesses and you see
California.
life.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, like we said. When you're crafting nonfiction stories about history or science, how do you strike a balance between like accuracy and creating something that keeps audiences glued? Because when we first had a conversation right before we started this, we were talking about the differences between you know like how like Josh Gates, for example. I love Josh Gates, what he does, how he presents history to us, how he teaches us about history. But how do you think we craft nonfiction stories in history to kind of strike that balance between actual and
It's a good question, and it's a tricky thing because no story is right. You have to realize that the way Josh Gates and I tell our stories, and I work with Josh Gates in a few series, and other people like him, and they're wonderful because they really love the history and how they talk about it. But that's one way of recreating history. You can go total, Assassin's Creed and kind of create a total fantastic violent world, or you can do a much more scholarly way of how Pompeii or the Egyptians built the pyramid, whatever. None of those are wrong. It in my world, and I make TV documentaries for the masses. The shows I make are not meant to be the definitive answer to any one historical time period. They're entertainment with a lot of history in them. And I know a lot of my Egyptology and archaeology friends kind of roll their eyes saying, oh, you're just sort of dumbing it down for the masses. While conversely, a lot of other people look at it and say, well, it's like, it's if you get so dry and so boring, you lose me if you don't have a narrative. I don't care about facts and figures and dates. So everybody comes at history a different way. I think the reason why so many of the shows I've done have had long legs and are so sort of evergreen, and I certainly didn't invent the genre. I'm just joined it late in the game. Is because they tell stories and they open it up so people could understand what they need to, without getting inundated. But the one thing I do not like to do, and I'm fortunate to have done very very few of these, is the paranormal stories or the ones where they claim that the pyramids were built by aliens, or some of these revisionist history, as they call, which is just BS. And I understand why people want to believe in a conspiracy and they want to believe that levitation created this or giants created Agamemnon's gate or whatever, but it's just nonsense. There's a reason that we call them pyramidiots in our television. A lot of them will watch the shows, and I don't mean to badmouth people who don't want to believe in the archaeologists who often get it wrong. But you have to respect these people are passionate at what they do, and they have devoted their lives and generation for generations of trying to bring all this culture back. So finding that balance that appeals to both is not always easy. Invariably, someone's going to feel it's too heavy or it's too light. I like to think we try to find that soft spot where we tell a story, we make it engaging, but we allow you to go off if you're curious about the Roman Empire and Google it and find out more on your own.
I think it's profound the way that you have put that. You know, we all. You know, I learned this even in not only in my own academic career, but I learned it as a cop specifically, and especially taking statements from people who were witnesses to something. Everybody has a different perspective, and everybody takes certain information in where others don't take it in. So I think filling those gaps where somebody's more visual or somebody's more audible, and somebody understands something from a different level or perspective, and creating an environment that will educate us and hopefully motivate us and inspire us. I think is a better way to go because it gives something that everybody can walk away with at least something.
As I said before, we're talking, it's a gateway drug. Give them a gateway drug. I
Yeah.
can't be, if you're curious about Vikings, I can do a show about Vikings, but it better not end with what Neil Laird created. Go out and explore books about ninth century England and Scandinavia and go down those rabbit holes like I did when I was in the New York Public Library 30 years ago, whatever. If I stopped at one book, I wouldn't have this curiosity, this insatiable appetite. Feed that passion.
Yeah. I guess important. I think it's important as well. I know that you've through some of your stuff like Mysteries of the Abandoned and through the Wormhole, which I watched both of those. By the way, what was your biggest creative challenge, considering what we just spoke about? What would be your most creative challenge that you faced while working on those kind of shows?
I certainly have many, and I'm working right now on a show called History's Greatest Mysteries, and every script is a challenge because you never know how to kind of shape it. So every show you work on has its own parameters. I think one of the most challenging and one of the most rewarding I probably did wasn't a history show. It was a science show, but a very popular one you might remember called Brain Games. It was on
Yes.
National Geographic. And I did the first three episodes, and I remember it was one of those passion projects. The guy who was the head of Nat Geo at the time, and he wanted to do a show on brain psychology about how we see and how we hear. And we thought, oh my god, this is death. This is the most boring, dull, dry thing in the world. There's no way we're going to bring to life. In fact, I remember even when they greenlit it, they greenlit three episodes, and they say we'll dump it all in one night because no one's going to watch. But then we started getting together and talking about how we can make sight and sound and vision, all the kind of things we talk about brain games. Each one was kind of like playing games on how we see the world. One was attention, one was memory. And there were so many fun tricks to play on our brain. There were so many ways to kind of make it dramatic. Or the episode on attention, we shot all in Las Vegas, and we got a magician to host it. And we got David Copperfield to appear in it, and Neil Patrick Harris narrated it with a kind of sense of fun. So we made something that sounds sort of dry and dull, essential and fun and play along. And the show was a ratings bonanza. It went through the roof on National Geographic. So much that they made a series out of it, which I wasn't involved in, that ran for like 3 or 4 years or whatever. But it was such a joy because none of us thought we thought we were all working on something sort of in secret. We were really proud of it. We thought 12 people would watch it and it would disappear, but at least we could show it to friends, on holidays or whatever. And here becomes this sort of like touchstone that was Geographic's biggest show for years. And those are the things you never know what they're going to hit and how. And because filmmaking is never just me. When you say Neil Laird has been in these countries, I have a crew. Sometimes the crew goes out. If I go out, I have a camera person and a sound person and a fixer and a local person. It is so much done by committee. It is so much done by people grouping together. Unlike writing, a novel writing is a different beast. But filmmaking has to be collaborative. And that's when you never know what sparks are going to fly until you start talking about it.
Yeah, and I think that the the difference between, I mean, there's a difference between television, making television, whether it be sitcoms or any other reality show or a sitcom or a drama or a comedy, whatever you see, making a film, documentary film, or a history. Let me regroup here for a second because I have like three questions running through my head, and I'm trying to catch up to them. So, do you see? Is there a major difference? Because do you consider documentary filmmaking similar to creating something like Expedition X or something like one of the National Geographic programs that we see, or the movies, or the archaeological, the Egyptian one, the King Tut, the show that we've watched or I've watched about King Tut and where they had come from and the new findings and opening thing, or do they overlap? Because most of us think of a documentary film as something that's kind of dry and and this is no offense meant in
Yeah,
regard to anybody making a documentary film because I
it's
did it
right.
myself.
Yeah. Are you? I mean, what are you asking? Like I mean, I make a very small sliver of the pie of these kind of shows because I felt, in fact, even in television, what I make is called factual. When I'm a geographic or history or whatever, National Geographic, we work in the factual department because there's
Hmm.
also documentaries that are, Love Island or game shows or the reality shows on TLC where it's a bunch of ladies with long nails yelling at one another. That's not my bailiwick. But those are documentaries too, and I applaud people who can do those. It's just I don't, they don't come natural to me. So documentary is very much a generic term for all manner of storytelling, nonfiction, and of course nonfiction is even sort of a misnomer because many of the shows you wouldn't be surprised are heavily scripted. You have to, even now when I go out in the
Right.
field, again, I'm working on a show now where we pre-script it and we go out in the field. We let things happen, but we know we only have 4 or 5 days in the field. So it's not like we can sit there and wait for reality to just happen. We have to get it all done, get the interviews done, get the B-roll done, get the action done, and then get home and cut it because it airs in July, that kind of thing. But then my very first thing that I worked on as associate producer back in the early '90s was a film called Hoop Dreams. I don't know if you remember this film. It was nominated for an Oscar, and it was these three wonderful filmmakers, followed two black kids in the ghettos of Chicago for 7 years, and it was all about would they get out of Chicago and get to
Yes.
the NBA
Yes.
and become
Yes. I do remember that.
and they're, yeah, yeah, and it was a wonderful documentary, and it was a documentary where it had 350 hours and things just happened. They had no idea where they were going. They would go in the homes of these people and they would sit with them and they would let life play out. And they had very little narration. It was a verite, they would call it in my film school days, sort of untouched reality. That's a very different documentary than what I have done, and it's a wonderful documentary. And yet, so it really is a question of how you want to tell that story and what the stories you want to tell. Because I do historical and factual, they're heavily narrated. There's less action going on and more information going on. So each one has its own format that you have to follow.
As an LGBTQIA creator, do you think part of has your personality or perspective shaped those kind of stories that you're telling, and uh, in such a way that it has a wider impact across the world?
I'm not sure in television, I wouldn't say no. And that can kind of lead to why I wrote the books. But it's not that the business I work in, look, my homes are New York, London, and LA, very liberal cities, very, very embracing cities for the LGBTQ community. And a lot of the people I work with are either gay or certainly there's very little homophobia in my world. And yet, when we make films for the masses, and a lot of these communities that we make them for may not want to kind of hear those stories. We don't censor them, but we never denigrate them.
Right.
But what I do find, and it's a little disappointing, I find with the networks, is they don't embrace them either because it's all about numbers and ratings. So people won't expressly go out and tell a story about gay people of the ancient world because again the numbers won't be strong enough. I try to bring them into my films, but it's not a natural way. Sometimes I'm writing again. I wrote a script last week about Alexander the Great. So I made sure to mention Aspasia and his gay lover, his male lover in the script, and that will get in there as sort of a sidebar. But to do films about gay people, um, yeah, I think national American TV is really not the place for it, unfortunately.
There's no forward. Yeah, I know that. I mean, you look in actual history, you see an integration, and you see where there are male, female, and crossovers throughout history. You can read it and see it. And unfortunately, I think that the atmosphere, especially unfortunately, backtracking here now, it is just not ready for it in such a way.
You thought we were, you know, I've been married to my husband for 25 years, and you know, you feel the pendulum swing back in a big, ugly way. But again, also too, it's like I think you bring it back to the personal experiences and my own experience of coming out as a gay man or just traveling as a gay person. I remember seeing places around the world, Pompeii, just for example, Egypt, another where you see gay tombs. There's a great tomb in Egypt called the Tomb of the Brothers near Saqqara, the step pyramid. And it's always been called the Tomb of the Brothers as they excavate it and refound it in 1964. But it clearly is a gay couple. And they called the brothers because of homophobia that existed in 1964 that clearly didn't exist in Old Kingdom Egypt, because here are people that were sanctioned to be buried near the Pharaoh. And this is this loving couple that went to eternity together. And they, you know, it is, I walk in there and just see this stuff and say, oh, you know, we are cyclical. We are not necessarily getting better. In many cases, people were much open for same sex or other sex unions than they are now. This is my second book again to bring it back to Pompeii. One of the inspirations for is those plaster casts. Well, there's a very famous plaster cast where you walk into the amphitheater gate, the main gate, and they have them rather kind of rudely stuffed in next to the gift shop. All these dead people that, I mean, mostly they're just cement and they're hollowed out bodies. But there's one of two people in embrace, and one is holding the other's chest very tight. And it was found in like 1790 or whatever, a long time ago. But they've always called it the two maidens, I think it was, or the mother and her daughter. And they assumed that it was a mother and her daughter that got caught during the pyroclastic flood and killed. And that's how it's displayed in the gift shop since eternity. Um, but they did CAT scans and DNA testing 4 or 5 years ago and realized not only were they both male, but they also were not related, and they're probably between 30 and 20 and 30 years old. Now we can make an assumption from that that they were same-sex lovers, but I look at these two people holding each other tight as the end comes. And it's really hard to imagine doing that with a random shopkeeper or the tanner down the road or whatever. These were two people who loved one another and went out as close as they could. Now, I don't know all the details. We never will know. But clearly, we know that homosexuality is accepted in ancient Rome because you see it all in the brothels and elsewhere. So why wouldn't a gay couple getting caught in the flow like anybody else? And that was kind of like the inspiration for my last book. My TV time traveling crew goes back to find out the identity of these two men.
I find that from a DNA perspective, I find that really unique that they were able to go back and find that out in regard, especially as long ago as that was, and
Yeah.
being able to get DNA from that.
Yeah, I know some deep in the bone is by that point it's never guaranteed. I think because it's almost flash freeze, you know, fast frozen.
Yeah,
And I think with bones they can tell by the hips of a man versus a woman, that kind of thing. And I think they're still only 80% sure one's a man. They know 100% one is a man, like 80% the other, but enough for to believe that it very easily could be the
there
same people.
was.
But yeah, but it is again, it's fascinating. And again, it's like nobody should try to put a definitive answer to anything in history. We have the right to create our own stories. But
Yeah,
in my books and when I can in my films, I try to, if I can't accentuate LGBTQ, I try to at least normalize it.
no, yeah. And I think that's what at least it. Look, as part of society, we part as part of humanity, and then it should be that done that way. So I applaud you for taking that approach.
Gay cavemen, I'm sure, there'll be 10,000 years from now, if we're still around, there will be a gay X or whatever. So, but again, I'm not driven by sexuality too. It's like, I'm a man in my 50s and very comfortable with who I am and when I came out. my stories kind of go deeper. I just want to normalize everybody as much as I can. So that's why I started writing fiction to tell the stories. I could really make shit up for the first time that I couldn't. Because you
Yeah.
ask what it's like to make a Nat Geo show, whatever, everything is a footnote, which is great because that's the way it should be. You like to
Yeah.
think when you sit down and plop in and watch a Josh Gates, they're not feeding you a bunch of BS. They're not because every line is footnoted and made sure. Now, people can make, you watch Ancient Aliens or some of those more dopey shows, they will qualify by saying some argue, or it has been contended, or there are
Yeah.
those. That's a network distancing themselves from a lawsuit.
Yeah. Disclaimer. Instead of saying disclaimer, every statement disclaimer here.
Not us, not us.
Oh, that's funny. Um, uh, how did Let me ask you this from a filmmaker perspective, because as I told you, I went back to school. I learned filmmaking, and I learned documentary filmmaking in particular. I chose that portion of it from myself. But I do know filmmaking, and my first film I ever made was 16 millimeter, and it wasn't digital camera back then, because I'm an old guy. Back then,
Those days,
I'm sorry.
I'm no spring chicken. I remember those days too.
Yes. So it is. I mean, because we had to do 16 millimeter. It was independent film. We shot the 16 millimeter. 16 millimeter then had to be ranked down to beta. Beta, we had to take it in to get it edited through had to pay to have somebody else do it. They had all this huge equipment to have to put it down on, via a tape or DVD kind of a thing, and then play with it. Whereas now you see a difference between editing where, like this show, I have Final Cut Pro, I have Adobe, I've got DaVinci Resolve, I've got all these aspects that I can take this program, I put it into my desktop here, and then I can edit everything I need to do. Bam, 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 bam. I come up with a show. Do you think, from a documentary perspective, documentary filmmaking perspective, has that been an advantage to you to have this at your fingertips more so than what it was like in the old days?
Well, it depends on your vantage point, doesn't it? I mean, I am probably the last of my generation that had an entire career out of network cable TV. Cable TV is dead. They don't need executive producers, which I was for Science Channel for 12 years, because a lot less production is made. People weren't watching those kind of shows. Streaming is taking over. So a lot of people are getting out of the business merely because far less shows are being made. And it's not just streaming. Think about it now. Netflix might make four or five Mysteries of the Abandoned or What on Earth, as opposed to us back in the day that had four or five nights on History Channel or Science Channel that put out. So there's less people in the field, less people making it, and it's being replaced by people who can do it on their own. So as an economic standpoint, for those of us in the business, it's a terrible thing what's happening. But yet, in terms of democratization of storytelling, in terms of everybody has a right to tell their story and get it out there through YouTube or anything else or TikTok, it's brilliant because it's an
Yeah.
equalizer. It is a great equalizer. There's no reason why a 12-year-old girl in Ohio doesn't have a story that's just as valuable as some multiple Emmy and BBC nominated or BAFTA nominated guy who's been doing it, since 1962. Everybody has the right. I mean, some are probably better than others, but I mean, it's fascinating now where the fragmentation has splintered so much. There's just so many different ways to go in terms of storytelling. 30 seconds, if I get my nieces or younger people they would never watch one of my hour-long shows. They
Yeah.
want to see it in 10 minutes and they're done. And that's simply the model we have right now. And it's neither right nor wrong, just like TV eclipsed movies and movies eclipsed plays and whatever else it was. This is where we are. So
Sure.
it's fascinating to kind of watch an industry of mine in many ways collapse, which in many ways I think it is. My father worked in a steel plant in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, until he retired in the late 90s. And he retired by turning off the light to the steel plant and letting everybody go. The steel industry died, as you remember, in the 90s in the States. And in a way, I feel it's kind of tantamount to what's happening to my business in terms of these shows. Science Channel went away. I lost my job at Science Channel because the network closed. Um, I'm working with the BBC right now on something, and they need money from four or five other funders. They used to be able to plop down $1 million. Now you need to co-finance around the world. It's very rare that someone coughs up the dough for that kind of stuff. At least in my little slice of the pie, they'll still make $4 million for a game show, or whatever. But a lot more people watch this. So there are less places to shop the stuff. A lot of my friends that are Egypt freaks or history freaks or whatever, they just can't shop those shows anymore because no one's buying.
Yeah, I think that's sad. If I do, I honestly think that's sad from that perspective because it doesn't allow for that diversity that's needed in order for us to get a more rounded perspective from different conversations. And when I say different conversations, because as we started in the beginning of this show, we all take things in, whether it be audibly, visibly, or otherwise, or a combination of. We all understand something from our own perspectives and how it's presented to us, and taking away the opportunity for us to be able to understand it, because of that, I think is sad to have lost that.
I agree because that's the storytelling I love, but I also, I try to be a realist and take the long view. Remember, when you're talking about cultures that have run 3,000 years, history and storytelling won't go away. So hopefully, whoever are going to be the storytellers of the next generation will still find out about Pompeii. They will still be curious to
Yeah,
travel to Pagan or wherever. It'll just be a different path and a different way than we've done it.
yeah,
So I don't want to decry the fact that because our businesses dies, erudite thinking or any kind of deeper thinking goes away. I do think some of it does, because if you look at a TikTok video, it's sort of substance free. But those that are curious will find it out. I think they're still there. We have so much information at our fingertips right now. If I wanted to check about the DNA, results of that Pompeii thing, I could do while I'm talking to you. So
yeah.
information is there, like water. It is there. The question of how we use it and the question of how we turn stories into it. So I try not to be the doomsdayer and say, oh, all the good years are behind us. I just think it's going to be a model you and I may not recognize.
I agree with you. I mean, and again, this may be our generation, but reality is everything today is an instant gratification. I want it, and I want it now, and I want it quickly. And
Yeah.
I
And
think,
that's all. Yeah. There's a very smaller slice, I think, that are going to look for that.
yeah,
And I don't know what that means in terms of we can see with our leaders and everybody else where, being anti-intellectual is cool and not understanding things is a
yeah,
badge of honor. We won't go down that, ugly, nasty road, but that's what's ruling the roost right now. So in that world, it's all the more important. But I just can't imagine, and I don't think I'm being naive. I can't imagine it's going to go away forever because, again, the world's been around. We went through the Spanish Inquisition, we went through the Black Plague, and we went through so many other dodgy times in history, and we still bounce back. Whatever horror shows await us here, I don't know. I don't think we're down and out just yet in terms of intellect and creativity. I won't
yeah.
be around to see it. Probably neither will you, but someone will suss it out.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so because I'm not complaining about the digital technology age because obviously it allows us to talk across from each other. You being in New York, me being here, and I've had conversations all over the world that I wouldn't have been able to have without this digital opportunity. It gives me the opportunity to have conversations and to create what I want to create to hopefully inspire and motivate other individuals and to educate them. And I do it because of the forum of the digital age. Um, but it's hard. I think it's hard because even that is changing to a point where, even with my shows, I do 15 minutes to an hour, and people keep saying, why don't you do 30? Why don't you do 30 minutes to 35 minutes? But sometimes it takes longer than that to tell the story. And I think, do you think do you think that's going to be a problem with some of the content that's going out there now, and especially in the archaeological aspect, or like the Josh Gage type shows? I mean, he's got like what, four or five now.
Hmm. So, what's your question now? You're saying in
Yeah.
terms of
Do you think that where everybody is they don't want to sit around for an hour, like you said earlier? Um,
oh, I'm sure the attention spans are, like a gnat these days, and we know that where people get restless. We all do. We're sitting here, and my husband will say, "Let's watch a new show." We'll give it 30 seconds. We'll say, "No, I don't like it." And I'm a filmmaker, and he's a journalist. But the world is always kind of moving around so quickly, and there's so much content. It's easy to move on. So I do think we are at this hyped up speed where We don't slow down and accept. I mean, when I was growing up, I'm sure we had 3 or 4 channels, and whatever book mom bought me at the bookstore is the one I
Yeah.
read because that's on the table. So less was more in a way. So but again, it's if you're curious, it's there. I don't know what the knock on effect of people with these short attention spans mean in terms of creativity, in terms of storytelling. But you've seen this already, where a story often on Instagram, whatever, is 2 minutes long tops, and for some people that's satisfying. To me, I get very restless. I love a good hour. I love, what am I reading now? There's 1,000 pages. I have no problem diving into a mega novel, whatever. And I think that's just the patience of where I grew up. So
Well,
I don't want to put a limit on it. I could, but I'd rather not.
I would hope that audiences, will continue to be captivated by the unknown and ancient mysteries and deep sea explorations and new archaeological finds, because they're still happening. They are still happening. That there's still going to be more than that, because I believe that it allows us as human beings to kind of understand that we all came from somewhere, and we all have history, and we all should value history and where we came from. We should all understand that what was before us and the shoulders that we stand on are what put us where we're at today. At least that's just my personal opinion.
And hopefully, along with that, people will do their own research and not just look at whatever people offer as an easy answer, the alien theory or some sort of magical theory, or whatever, and just question that. So don't be afraid to question stuff. I think a lot of people
Yeah,
just don't question what's put in front of them, and therefore they do not dive into their own sort of research
I
and
agree with that. How did you, as a storyteller, transition from, film, television, and documentary filmmaking? How did you transition from that into writing a novel? Has that always been like a little seed planted deep down in your soul that you wanted to be an author, or how'd that come about?
it wasn't really. I mean, I was happy doing my documentaries, and I think it was only um, I always had the idea. I mean, as I started traveling all these places, I'm looking at again a denuded landscape, as I said, or a few broken columns, and it's hard to imagine what they're like 1,000 years ago. You can't help but wonder what it was like to walk down this avenue of the Sphinxes in ancient Egypt, 1,000 BC. And the only way you can do that is either through fiction or through fantasy. Um, so two things happened in 2016 that made me realize I want to write my first novel. And they both seem kind of strange and arbitrary, but it actually kind of helped me reset my life. One was I turned 50. So yeah, it was a big thing, and I realized, oh, there's a lot more history behind me than in front of me. And I realized if I am going to write a novel, I better get off the loo and do it. I better go off and get it. And then the same month, the same time period, my great creative idol died, David Bowie. I was a huge Bowie fan, and I grew up being the first one to buy Bowie and every album that came out, and I loved the journey he would take me on and all that kind of stuff. And when he died, and I was reading his obituary, which of course I kind of already knew, I was reminded again. I got a dog there. I was reminded again just how fearless he was, and how this guy reinvented himself 28 times with 28 albums. And I remember thinking, well, I certainly will never be David Bowie, but if he can reinvent himself and be fearless almost 30 times, I can do it once. So that coupled with becoming 50 said it's time to kind of try this new way of storytelling. And it wasn't like a natural progression. Some things I already had sussed out nicely in terms of cause and effect and signposting and cliffhangers, all the stuff we do in television. But then writing a book and being literary is a very different thing than writing a blueprint for a script. So I had to reteach myself something else, and in a way, I had to wean myself off of television and screenwriting, and it took many, many drafts and many, many attempts till I finally found the sweet spot, and I recognized, as they always say, write what you know. So the two loves of my life are TV production and ancient history. So I wanted to combine the two. The best way to do that was to kind of create a kind of cheesy ancient alien like TV crew that finds a way to travel to the ancient past to win an Emmy. So clearly it's comedic and it's a satire of my day job, but it allows me, in the first book, Primetime Travelers, they go back to ancient Egypt and they have to travel the 12 gates of the Duat, the underworld, to find a mummy, or they get stuck in ancient Egypt. And they have their camera and their shootings. They got all their gear, and yet they're in the wonderful. I can get into all the mythology of ancient Egypt, and yet have a wisecracking camera woman from the Bronx. You know, and it was fun. I found my voice, and I was able to transition from history back into comedy to satire of television. I made sure the two lead characters are gay, both the camera woman and the lead guy. He comes out in the first book. So the books are very much about them wanting to bring to life like these people at Pompeii in each book. So I was able to take in way three of my pillars of my passions and bring them into one book, and that's what the Primetime series is.
What an opportunity! What a story! I mean, I need to I need to read these books.
I
I
think
don't.
you get a kick out of it, particularly if you love television. You'll recognize a lot of the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. When we first started doing this, we first contacted each other. Obviously, I didn't have time to read them, but the concept itself and the fact that you've included or integrated the aspect of filmmaking, television making, and history and time travel. I mean, what what better trio?
Yeah, it comes natural and it's fun and able to kind of play off of conventions and allows me again for the first time in my life to make stuff off and have fun, but at the expense of my feckless crew. I mean, there's a cheesy TV host and there's a gruff Egyptian camera sound guy who's tired of all the Americans telling them how to think. You know, so I can kind of all the bits and pieces that I've had traveling around the world. I was able to create in this 4-person crew that very much loves each other and they're very much a team. It's very much a found family. But each adventure, each book is them kind of getting swept off into the past and seeing if they survive or not.
Well, that. I think obviously you have two out. You have two out right now, and you're coming with the. It's a three-part series, correct?
Yeah, I'm working the third one right now, Primetime Troy, where they go back to the ancient Trojan War.
Plus, you
And
picked what like significant aspects of history you picked to go back to. It's like, well done, dude.
And I want to go for the marquee, as we say in television. And, I want to find something. And again, I picked a lot of his places I've been in love, but also, too, I want to get all the major cultures, Rome, Greece, and Egypt. And with the third one, Achilles and Patroclus, I want to talk about a famous gay love affair. And if you read the Trojan War or you read the Iliad, you really see it's all kind of really about Achilles brooding when they take his lover away and he stops fighting because they took. So I wanted to kind of play in the convention of that and what it was like and have my modern day crew kind of go back and meet the original characters, Agamemnon and stuff. And still, I listened to I wrote the book as I always do. I went to on location. I went to Turkey for 5 weeks last summer and I wrote the first draft of Troy near the ruins. So I'd
Oh,
come back
cool.
and type away watching the sunset over the Aegean. I wrote Pompeii in near Sorrento in the Bay of Naples, and I would take day trips to Pompeii, put headphones on, and walk around, and come home and create characters just based on stuff that I met. One of the if you go to Pompeii, there's a wonderful villa, a woman named Julia Felix, one of the richest women, and she became a lead character of the book, which I never heard of her before. It's
Hmm.
just been reopened, so she became the love interest of Kara, the camera woman, in book two. So a lot of it immersing myself in just the discovery of finding it, going to Troy and stumbling over the ruins. I don't know what I'm going to write until I start writing it.
What an amazing opportunity to write a book and walk through history at the same time. I think that the innovation, the unique approach to what you're putting into the book actually is you're walking through the book, you're walking through the concept, you're walking through which is cool. They're very cool, very
And
cool,
it
very
helps.
cool.
I very much because of documentary. Like there's one scene in primetime Pompeii. It's a modern scene where Jared, the lead character, has to go back to the presence for a reason. You have to find out. You have to read the book, but it's during the busiest section, so he has to find a place when all of the tour guides are there, and they ask for his badge and all this stuff. So I was able to, and I wrote that scene after going to Pompeii on a very busy Saturday. I wouldn't have had that scene if I hadn't gone
If
and
you
just
hadn't been there,
walked the archaeological park as well. And I use that as a plot point in a chapter in the book. So it's not even
yeah.
just the ruins, it's just the feel of a place and what it's like. Because again, I'm talking about the modern world and the ancient world, so I can blur them together.
Well, and the advantage is that you've combined your experience in exploring this for over 1,000 episodes of so many others and traveling to 70 different countries and in looking at these archaeological sites and history and historical aspects and in I mean just I it's yeah it's I think it's going to be it's hard to put into words, but I can tell you that wow, you get me excited. It's a situation I think that integrating all of that, you've kind of taken what I normally would have watched sitting on my couch in front of a television set and put it in my hands, which I think is pretty cool.
I love, if you read it, let me know. But it'd be good to know how it reaches people too, because I do think it's at the end of the day they have to be fun too. They're not these are not intellectual treatises. These are books art to sweep you away. They are armchair travel, which is in many ways what I do for television. So I think it's
Yeah.
part and parcel of what I've been doing for the last 30 years. It's just now in book form rather than
Well,
on TV.
that's what I like about the unique approach. That because I love TV and film so much, and I am a history buff and an archaeological buff. I find this intriguing from that perspective. What advice would you give to aspiring filmmakers or storytellers who want to make their mark in the world of nonfiction, either movies or storytelling in any way, whether it be movies, TV, or author?
First, don't wait. Do it straight away. If you're curious about a place, travel there. If you want to write a book, don't wait till you're 50 to do it. I mean, you could do, but just don't be afraid to fail. That's me. Don't be afraid to fail. You're gonna fall on your face a lot, and your first film and your first book and your first travel, whatever, is not going to be flawless. But you get so much better, and then you'll find your vibe, and you won't want to quit. So there's so many ways to kind of tell that now. Again, you can pick up your phone and do something just, walking around downtown Brooklyn if you want. Doesn't have to be epic, but just start doing it, start creating. Once you poke it, you know.
Poke it. Yep. You have to take the first step and poke it.
Exactly. Don't talk about it. It's a
Yeah,
shame, but it's true.
yeah. Well,
So
that should, we'll put that on a T-shirt. Take that first step and poke it.
exactly.
How do we find your books and how do we find more about you and your
My
everything
books are
about you?
available on Amazon. So if you just go to Amazon and Google either Neil Laird or Primetime Travelers or Primetime Pompeii. Travelers is the first one. Pompeii is the second. Will come out later in the year. Um, or you can go to neillaird.com, my website, and just learn more about me. But the books are available exclusively through Kindle and Amazon. So that's the place to go to buy them.
Outstanding. I'll make sure that's in the show notes as well.
In Amazon, reviews are extremely important. So if you do read it and you like it, please take the time to give me a review because that helps it get seen. The more reviews, the more people notice it.
Yes, I agree with that. And I'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes to they can actually click it and go directly to there so they can find you that fast. Uh, I could talk to you for another couple hours, but we can't do
If
that
it's,
at the moment. it's been
we can always do it again.
it's been a pleasure to meet you and to walk this journey with you on this conversation. I really appreciate it. You've shared so much and with your wisdom, your experiences, and what you've achieved and what you've done. But I do have one more thing before we go. Do you have any words of wisdom that you can share?
I think I just said that. In a way, just do it. If you've got it, don't wait until tomorrow. You're going to travel. Do it today. Just ask questions. Don't trust everything everybody says. It's an age where everybody's telling everybody what to think, and it's a lot of BS floating around out there.
A lot of
Don't be,
BS for sure.
don't be that guy.
Profound words of wisdom.
Exactly.
Neil, again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your journeys and your wisdom with us.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yep. For everyone out there, thank you very much for being a part of One More Thing Before You Go, the community. I look forward to our next conversation. Please like, subscribe, share, and write a review. And one more thing before you all go, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.